Namashri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Sachit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. Last time we talked about Swamiji's work in Thousand Island Park, which was a very great work, Swamiji in the West. Now, gradually, another chapter will begin, his European tour. But in between, there are a few months, and Swamiji, after coming from Thousand Island Park, he was giving lectures, most probably in the estate of Miss Phillips. You see, she was a student of Swamiji, and unusually, this lady was very rich, but spiritually also sensitive. When Swamiji lectured, he understood that Swamiji was, he was talking of a foundational faith through which one can relate, even Christians could relate better with Jesus, because he's going to the foundation of this faith. So thereby, I should say that to discover this requires a spiritual sensitivity. So she had that. And she was very wealthy also by heritage. Though she had donated much of her fortune, and in those days when Swamiji met her, to keep up her costs, she was accepting boarders in his estate. It was a big estate with mountains, with lakes, rivers, everything in it. So Swamiji, as usual, was, busy with his classes there in Miss Phillips' estate, most probably because there was no other place. And there he came across many persons in these meetings, including the sculptress Malvina Hoffman, who was only a child then. Hoffman used to reminiscence like this, that suddenly this man entered into, Hoffman was related to the Phillips. She said that suddenly she entered there in their house, and he says that his dark bronzed countenance and hands were in sharp contrast to the voluminous light folds of his turban and robe. His dark eyes hardly glanced up to notice his neighbors, but there was a sense of tranquility and power about him that made me highly impressioned by him. He seemed to personify the mystery and religious aloofness of all true teachers of Brahma, he says, thereby meaning Brahman. And with this, a kindly and gentle attitude of simplicity towards his fellow men. Hoffman would later on make a sculpture of Swamiji, which is famous. Before his going, Swamiji was visualizing his trip to London. From there, one of the boys who was, known to Swamiji in India and who had been adopted by Miss Muller, Henrietta Muller. You remember in Thousand Island Park, she had sannyasa from Swami Vivekananda, and many people at that time were saying that Swamiji has bitten off much more than he could chew. That means this lady, though talented, though spirited, would be difficult to tackle with. And before going to Europe, Swamiji was thinking of, by way of gratitude, to give some presents to the persons who were behind him and his work. Bull, Bagley, Detroit, then Madam Hale in Chicago, and all these people in New York, Miss Phillips, and also in New York, Guernsey, etc. So he asked for a few things from the Maharaja of Khetri, and maybe also from the Dewan of Khetri. This included rugs and shawls and brocades and certain knickknacks, that means the small objects which are used for decorating the house, and two large and heavy, very special rugs, one for Guernsey family, who was housing him, was was almost like his father, and he was a homeopath doctor in New York. And the other was a wedding gift for Francis Legate, who was already betrothed to the sister of Miss MacLeod. So Betty Sturge was already married and widowed. So she was marrying again this man Legate, who by this time has become a close friend of Swamiji. So these gifts you see, is Swamiji's affection and gratitude for many people, but he had to take much trouble for it. The things would come from England to New York, from India, and from there they would by train would go to Chicago. So you see, this was a very long thing, and in different times the Dewan's things arrived early in Chicago, and the Hale family certainly had to pay the duty for it, which Swamiji said later on that you should have told me, because I should pay for it, because it is present from me. And then the things were coming from the Maharaja of Khetri, from destination to destination, it was crossing. But I have seen because the thing given to Legate family, that means the wedding gift, the Legate's descendants ultimately gave it to the Ramakrishna Vivekananda Center of New York. And I think I have seen this in 1896 when I visited Thousand Island Park. And along with that, another consignment of beads, that means the rosary, they came. Swamiji distributed to many people. At least 3 shawls, there may be much more, we know, it came, and one went to Mrs. Bull, and another to Mrs. Bagley in Detroit, and another to Miss Phillips. And they're Kashmir shawls embroidered with threads of gold. So these are very costly things. And Swamiji was happy that he could give something to the people who had helped him in this distant land. Then on 17th August, Swamiji left by ship to France. The journey took 7 days, and it was a deluxe ship, SS Touraine, a French ship, and it landed at Le Havre By train, they came from there to Saint Lazare in Paris, where Betty Sturge and Miss MacLeod were already waiting for him in the station. So now he is in 24th of August, he is already in Paris. In Paris, among many other things, he drove one day, at least that is what we know, that to with the Duchess de Pomar, who was a rich lady but was too much leaning towards the occult things. She believed that she was the incarnation of Queen Mary of Scotland, and she used to believe that she communicated with her. That means Mary of Scotland, who was executed by her distant relation, Queen Elizabeth of England. Now something happened, you see, of which Swamiji, you see, we know this from Swamiji's brother Mahendranath Gupta, because the thing made a deep impression on Swamiji. One day they took a phaeton and was driving with this Duchess of the Pomar, and the phaeton for sightseeing, and the phaeton was going in the direction of a village outside Paris. Suddenly they saw that two children are walking with a maid servant by the side of the road. The coachman came out of the phaeton, went to the children, kissed them, and again came to the phaeton. And Duchess de Pomar said, "Why did you do it? These children must be belonging to some gentleman." You say, "Why did you do it?" So he explained that, "Look here, I was the manager of a bank. My bank failed. So whatever little money I had, I bought something, a small house here in a village, and I have kept a maid servant for my two children, and that's it." So they understood, and Swamiji was tremendously impressed that with what tranquility he has taken this man, this reversal. He was a rich man and suddenly he has become poor. But see, with the dignity and tranquility he is maintaining his life. He said that this is Vedanta. Of course, you see, if you take the Gita, Sukhe Dukkhe Samay Kritva Labha Labho Jaya Jayo. So here is an example, and this made a tremendous impression on Swamiji. Then, finally, after more than 2 weeks of sightseeing, on 9th of September, this wedding between Legate and Betty Sturge happened in the American Cathedral, the most beautiful example of English Gothic on the continent, this cathedral. And there are not much witnesses, Swamiji and a few friends, and the two children of Betty by the previous marriage. They were there. They were studying in Germany. So one day, among the wedding guests, Swamiji came across Maud Stum, who was a famous artist. Saw him. So it so happened that at one point they were seated side by side. They talked with each other whether they knew French. The lady said that she did not speak French. Swamiji said that he also did not speak French, and they began to. So suddenly, Maud Stum, Stumm. Suddenly she asked Swamiji, I think the English will be your leading force hereafter in this world. Swamiji said that next leading force will not be the English people. It will be either the Tatars or the Negroes. And he gave his reason for this. And Stum was surprised that Swamiji was not dealing with decades or centuries. He was dealing with vast ages with his knowledge of the nature of, different types of people on this earth. You see, he was dealing with vast ages. So this stunned. And when later on, during the 30s of the last century, Italy was defeated by Ethiopia. When this news came to Madame Stum, she remembered what Swamiji said, that Negroes, regarding the Negroes, that they will rise, though the Ethiopians are not real Negroes anyhow, but they are Africans. So this is it. And then Swamiji was, as I have told you, that it is Akshay Kumar Ghosh, the adopted child of Miss Mula. And then also, you see, he wrote on behalf of her mother, say Miss Mula, this invitation letter saying that. And also, earlier, he got a letter already in the month of March from one Mr. Sturdy. Now it is, you see, since the Sturdy and Muller, they will play some role in his life. And I have said that Miss Muller was very talented. So also was Mr. Sturdy. Mr. Sturdy's father, you say, the Sturdy family was poor in the, in the past. But by engaging themselves in commerce, etc., they became rich. Sturdy's father, for a time, settled in Toronto, where Sturdy was born. So his second name was Toronto, Edward Toronto Sturdy. Then he left. He did not like, his father did not like Canada, came back to England, and bought in the countryside 1,100 acres of land with rivers, meadows, etc., everything, and developed the land for the access road, etc. So his childhood was spent in this area. This estate was called Tigan. Tigan area, his childhood. Then when he went to college, had education, but this education was cut short because he was sent to the city to help his uncles in their job. So this he did not like, because you see, being child who has been in such open spaces, London was too crowded and too much of a city, so he did not like it. So when he was 18 years old, he took a ship to New Zealand himself and went there to the New Zealand has got two big islands. One of them is the North Island. He went to the North Island and took a contract to drive sheep to the port. So he was driving sheep. I think per sheep he was taking 1 shilling in those days. And from the north of the North Island to the coast. He was driving ships and he engaged drovers to herd the ships, etc. So this is one thing. And in the center of this North Island, he made his headquarters. He bought big forests, cut trees, made farmhouses, began to sell them. So in 10 years, by this method, he gathered something like 2,000 pounds, let's say, which was in those days a big amount. Now, while he was in his headquarters in the center of this North Island, one day a man who would become later on the Postmaster General of New Zealand, he was his friend, so he told him about theosophy. And he fell in love with theosophy. So they used to study, you see, theosophy had two sides. Theosophical Society, they were publishing scriptures of Hinduism, etc. And ready at hand was the Bhagavad Gita translation, of which the foreword was written by the first Governor General, Warren Hastings. Warren Hastings said this is foreword that this is a wonderful book and originality of thinking and diction and reasoning, you see, such that such a thing is not to be found in any books, holy books of any religions in the world. That is what is said in his foreword. Anyhow, but this translation was faulty. Anyhow, but this was charming for this young sturdy. But he thought finally that he should go to the source, since the headquarters was in Adyar. So he was communicating with Adyar, headquarters of the Theosophical movement, and he became the 5th member of the Theosophical Society in New Zealand. After some time, he thought that he must go to India. So he went to India, went to Adyar, met all the people there, including the international president, Colonel Alcott, and became very soon close to the inner circle of the theosophy. And for some time, he also, since he was simply not for the occult things, but the serious philosophical side of, you see, the scriptures, he was interested. So he wanted to do sadhana. He went to Kumaun, and there he met Swami Shivananda, brother disciple of Swami Vivekananda, and also another sadhu of the Saraswati group, Swami Satchidananda. He used to live near their ashrams, and he used to live like a sannyasin. This was his life. Then he sailed finally to England. And when in England, Sturdy fell sick, and he was a strict vegetarian. So he found no one who would, you see, take charge of him and prepare vegetarian diet. Finally, a nurse took pity on him, and she nursed him back to health. And finally, this man, who was a sannyasin practically for all purposes, he became married to this lady. This is the history of, you see. But even though he was, you see, married, he kept a little fire of his sannyasa life, of his love for the Gita and the scriptures, etc. So he invited Swami Vivekananda. And Swami Vivekananda came to him in September. It was September. I said the 9th September, the wedding was over. By September, in the month of September, he came to England. and was staying with Sturdy. And he found that the Sturdy was very much interested in Sanskrit. And he was trying to translate the Naradiya Bhakti Sutra. So Swamiji helped him, say, with this Naradiya Bhakti Sutra and explanation he gave. So a book was already being prepared. But what general work was he doing? Though theosophy was interesting, already Madame Blavatsky, she was exposed a little in Adyar, because he used to say, she used to claim that she could make things materialize. So something you would remember that in India, Satta Sai Baba was doing it. So anyhow, so this she was doing, and she was exposed. So this already had a bad name, and this thing stayed in your England, this their affair. And then in the middle of all that, Madame Blavatsky died. So when she died, there was regarding succession, there was a struggle. And there was one Mr. Judge in America who forged many documents and was claiming to be the head of the organization. So this was discovered, and so the judicial committee of the Theosophical Society summoned Mr. Judge, and everything became very open. So it has a very bad name for Theosophical Society in England in those days. Many people who were drawn to Theosophy because of his wisdom, etc., etc., in spite of the highly occult, because they were talking about the Mahatmas in Tibet who are sending communications, etc., etc., which are always very doubtful. So anyhow, for everything Eastern, there was a revolt in England at this time. So Swamiji arrived at a very bad time. So Sturdy asked him to go slow, that we should not hurry up. Now this is not the time, etc., etc. So that is how the things began in England. And then, of course, Theosophical Society would be salvaged somewhat by Annie Besant, who was a very, gifted speaker, and she actually attended the Parliament of Religions also, and saw Swamiji there. Madame Besant would finally, come out victorious in this struggle over power, and she would come to India to take charge of this Theosophical Society. And she did many good things also for India, it must be said. But anyhow, this other side of the movement was always there. So now, as I have said, that Sturdy was, asked him to go slow. But anyhow, Swamiji, little by little, he was making his first impression of in England was a surprise. He found that except the English people who had been to India, generally Englishmen were not hating colored people. They were polite. So Swamiji was astonished to see this, because Englishmen in India, few exceptions, they are like this. So one was exception was Mr. Fraser, who was a lecturer in Tamil and Telugu. He lived very long years in India and was full of Indian ideas. He understood India, And this Mr. Fraser had, you see, a very reverential attitude towards the Hindu doctrines even. Swamiji himself writes about his stay with study. He says that my friend, being a Sanskrit scholar, we are busy working on the great commentaries of Shankara, etc. Nothing but philosophy and religion here. That means this man was, though has a role as a husband and a father, he begot a son also, but still this side was there. I have not done any visible work as yet except helping Mr. Study in studying Sanskrit. So far it is all right, waiting for the next wave. Avoid not and seek not, wait for what the Lord sends is my motto. And he writes also that there is no hooting in the street because of his color, and they are generally very friendly here. And this Mr. Fraser, he had a good knowledge of Sanskrit literature, especially in the sphere of philosophy and religious ideas. He was intimately acquainted with Indian life. The professor had a book. His book is Indian Thought, Past and Present. There, in a paragraph of Sri Ramakrishna, he mentions this. Sri Ramakrishna's teachings were followed by his disciple Swami Vivekananda, who attracted large audiences to his lectures in England and America. In private conversation, he always maintained a quiet confidence that Indian thought, philosophical and spiritual, must once more go over and conquer the world. To his guru, the image of Kali was a consecrated and living image of God. To Vivekananda, in the worship of the idol, we are struggling to get to the thing signified, to get beyond the material to the spiritual. The spirit is the goal, not the matter. Forms, images, bells, candles, books, churches, temples, and all holy symbols are very good, very helpful to the growing plant of spirituality, but this far and no further. So this is quotation from his book, and evidently it is during his stay with Tardy he came across this Fraser. And you see, so Fraser would write these things. Now, I have talked about Miss Muller. Miss Muller was another talented lady. It is good to know because both of them, the study and Miss Muller, would play some role in his life. And this role was significant role. She was born in Chile, this Miss Muller, Frances Henrietta Muller. Then they're interrupted by a 2-year visit to Boston and London when she was between 9 and 11 years old, and marred only by frequent and alarming earthquakes to which Chile was a victim. When she was 13, the Muller family moved permanently to London. And here Henrietta and her young sister Eva, they attended school with more or less regularity. But in the vacations, they used to go to the continent, that means continental Europe. And therefore, she became a polyglot. She could speak many, many languages like French, German, Italian, and Spanish. So when she left school and was around 18, her father bought an estate in Hertfordshire, to which he moved the family. Henrietta disliked the place, and she did not like the life of women. That means women were doing needlework only, because in those days it was supposed that it was needless for women to have higher studies, because with higher studies they have no role to play anywhere. They were preparing themselves for the life of a wife and a mother. So she took a bold step, Miss Muller. So she went to college for her studies. So being college, and it was a there was only a small murmur in those days, say, but some women were feeling that this imposed idleness and the women is not good for women and also for the society, because we're not tapping, see, women could do many things, but about that, generally women themselves were not sure, and men folk also had a generally other idea that they are meant for keeping homes only. So Miss Henrietta Muller got into the front ranking. You see, she was among the handful of young women who, in defiance of strong and outraged parental opposition, social censure, and ridicule, enrolled at Girton, one of the two small colleges for women that had recently been founded at Cambridge. So she came out with typos, though with third class. After completing the usual 3-year course, Miss Muller passed the third class honors, I have said, in the moral science, which included subjects as political economy, philosophy, and psychology. The great London board, school board, established in 1870, was the first and for long the only place from which women could have an official voice in public affairs. So Miss Muller stood for election at the end of 1879, and she won the largest vote in the whole of London, and thereby found herself to be the president of the school board. So she worked hard on the school board, and she had extra energy. She was more man-like than woman-like, because she used to tricycle 50 miles sometimes a day, or is to row upstream for 20 miles on the Thames, etc. Now, she was in touch with the efforts to establish women's trade union. She founded the Society for the Return of Women as Poor Law Guardians. And in 1888, she started the Women's Herald, the first magazine conducted for women and managed by women only, Women's Herald. But then she was vociferous regarding your intemperance and compelled the school board against his wishes to oust a man, who was a heavy drunkard. And also, since women did not have vote, she refused to pay taxes for her house. So when a crowd, her furnitures were taken away by the people, because she did not pay tax. So many men and working men and women, they booed the bailiffs for so mistreating a poor defenseless lady. But she took up the cause, and it would become decades later, a victory, because women earned vote. Here also, when I came, there was a canton which was refusing women to vote in Switzerland itself. This Muller also joined, the Theosophical Society. So thereby, Study and Muller, they knew each other, because Study was one of the core members of the Theosophical Society. But then the affairs of Mr. Judge, incensed everyone. So both Miss Muller and Sturdy, they snapped their connection with the Theosophical Society. So this is a thing which brought the two persons together, and they would play a big role in Swamiji's activities. So let us stop today here. Any questions?
So far, no questions, Swamiji.
Okay.
But I would like to ask you one.
Yes.
You told that it was Mr. Sturdy who has invited Swami Vivekananda to England.
Yes.
So does it mean that Swamiji didn't have a plan to go there?
Swamiji was faintly thinking, but you must, you say, as I have said earlier, that before making any step in his life, he used to look for divine signs. So the divine signs, one was this Sturdy's letter, especially Sturdy mentioned in the letter that he had lived already in the Himalayas with his Guru Bhai. This word Guru Bhai he mentioned, you see. So Guru Bhai means brother disciple, Swami Shivananda, and also Swami Satchidananda. And both of them are men of respect. So this was one thing that a young earnest soul who knew one of his brother disciples, he was inviting. So this was, Swamiji could not refuse it. This was one sign. And added to that, this legate's marriage in Paris. He wanted to be in the marriage ceremony. Legate himself proposed that he would pay for his fare direct from here to London. Swamiji said no. He wanted really to be present in the wedding, you see, because Legate had become a great friend of Swamiji, and more so Miss MacLeod. Miss MacLeod, you see, used not to call herself a devotee, he used to call herself a friend of Swami Vivekananda. And she was a friend. These two, you see, when they came at the almost at the same time, so that he took as the divine call.
So further, you were telling that Mr. Sturdy and Swamiji, they were working together, going through Shankara's work.
Shankara's work.
Yes. So was there a summary or a book coming out of this?
No. They were studying because he was, you see, he had a leaning towards, though he did many things in his early life, the study, but inside this was there. This means a philosophical truth, a spiritual truth, etc., etc. Even though the relations later on became bad between Swamiji and Sturdy, but I know that Sturdy, even at the end of his life, was helping Swami Ghanananda in England. That shows that Sturdy throughout his life had a liking for Vedanta, etc.
So no other questions are there, Swamiji. So
Yeah.
I guess we can go to our next part, which is the meditation with the topics which you are giving to us.
Yes, meditation, you see, first of all, you should meditate upon, you see, on this, what this impressed Swamiji much during this coachman, you see, coming out of the phaeton and kissing his children and going back, and then you see That means with what calmness, you see, the whole thing, how a man can retain his dignity and tranquility in the face of such a reversal in fortunes. That should be our meditation. So, and this is, you see, the first topic was something related to practical Vedanta. So another such topic is the refusal of Miss Muller to pay taxes because women had no vote, so they should not pay also taxes, etc. And facing the consequences of this. Now you remember that Henry David Thoreau, the transcendentalist philosopher, he also protested against the Mexican War by USA, and he refused to pay taxes for the Mexican War, saying that this war was immoral war, and he was jailed for this. And in 1930, also Mahatma Gandhi, for example, defied the then law and went to the seacoast at Dundee to manufacture salt from the sea water. So these things, you see, this should be our topic of meditation. This is practical Vedanta, fighting injustice. And now I am referring to Swamiji's conversation with Maud Stim. Among other things, he said that the next great force in this world will be from the Tatars or the Negroes. Now, Negroes, we are seeing just now, you see what is happening, the Negroes. In America, for example, a man who is Métis, that means half Negro and half white lineage, he became the president, you see, in the recent past. And the present vice president has also a Tamil origin. So when you look at these things and look at Africa, I remember a few years ago, I was challenged in a meeting by this a group of evangelists from America. So they're talking about, you see, that we're talking about big things, but in your Hinduism, there is so much difference, etc., caste system. I discussed the caste system with them and turned towards them to say that there is caste also in the West. They asked me how. I said, you do not see it, but I see it. Africa and South America, they are poor because you have first baptized them, and then the white Christians from Europe and from the other side of the Atlantic are exploiting them. You see, this is the reason of their poverty. I said, in regard of Africa and South America, both cases it is the same thing. So this consciousness is coming to Africans themselves, and Africa will rise to USA. So let us think of this rise of the hidden power in man. You see, once exploited, they rise again. Thank you.